Alright guys, we ready to get started? Okay. Can I answer any questions before we do? Wanted to point out that I did go ahead and set up one last lab for you. It's less than 2 weeks to do it, which is the normal time frame. What do we have, more like a week and a half? I think I made it due next Thursday. So 9-10 days, somewhere around then. All the lab asks you to do is to go back and add tests to your previous lab. So to the most recent version of the series and episode lab. Right? Just go back, add tests to it, make sure the tests test what they're supposed to be testing, make sure the tests pass, that everything is being tested that should be tested, and that's it. Hopefully it's something that can be done pretty easily within the time frame, especially considering that Rails has written at least half of them for you. So really, chances are the majority of your series tests are already there and working. You'll probably just need to make some modifications to the episode tests to deal with the fact that you've got nested routes. Does that sound all right? All right, very good. Hopefully no fire alarms today, huh? If it does go off, I'm going to start to suspect one of you. Yeah. So anyway, we had barely gotten started last class, when the fire alarms went off and basically wiped out the rest of our time. What I was going to start with last week, what I'll start with today was the last time we did have a full class, we had been talking about testing our to-do app, and I had written a couple of tests, one to test to make sure that we could mark a to-do item as being complete, the other one to test to make sure that we could mark a to-do item as being urgent. And at the time, at the end of class that day, neither of those two tests were passing. I figured out later that afternoon what had gone wrong with them and fixed it, but I just wanted to walk you through it and show you how I figured it out. Right? Basically, for these two tests, both of them have a setup method that runs first that loads a to-do item, grabs one of the to-do items from our fixtures, essentially from the database. Right? What happens then, essentially with both of them, is they then take that to-do item and submit a put request to the update action of the to-do controller and submit the actual value that they want to have updated. So complete true in the case of one of the tests, urgent true in the case of the other one. Right? And what we were seeing with both of them was that when we then asserted that true was the value of that particular attribute, we kept getting back a failure. Right? The true didn't seem to actually be getting set. What I figured out had gone wrong, what I was doing wrong, was that we basically had a stale object. The to-do item that was being loaded up in the setup method and was then being passed as part of the put request, or whose ID was being passed as part of the put request, that object in memory was different than the object in memory that was actually being modified by the to-do controller update method. Right? So the @todo we have here in update is of course not the same @todo that we were dealing with over here in our tests. Right? So it was the copy of the object in the controller that was having its data updated. But then when that was complete and completed successfully, and we came back over to the test itself, the to-do item we were then checking to see if it was complete was still the one that had been loaded into memory before the request. So essentially what I did to fix the problem was after I did the request to update, I just told Rails reload that to-do item. Go out and get the freshest data for it from the database. And once that was done, the to-do item here in the test was caught up with the to-do item that had been modified over in the controller, and all of a sudden the assertion passes. Right? I wish I could say that I just had an epiphany that led me to realize that was what was wrong, but in actuality I fixed it the old-fashioned way. I put in a bunch of put s's. Remember good old put s from Ruby? And we haven't used them much, if at all, in Rails, but in a lot of places you can still put them in. If you put in a put s in your controller, put in a put s in your tests, they will still show up. Right? If you put them into the controller, they'll show up in the output log whenever that controller action executes. If you put them into the test, then they'll show up in the output from running the tests, when we run the Rake command. So essentially what I did was something like this. At the beginning of the test, I did a put s for to do, and then I put in the ID number of the to do, so I could make sure I wasn't using different to-dos, was kind of my idea. then I'm going to say complete is, and I'll do @to-do complete. Right? And a lot of times when I do try to debug this way, I'll maybe stick some asterisks in front of the output just to make it easier for me to spot it when it shows up over in the test output, since the test output can be pretty busy. For the moment, I'm going to go ahead and take out that to-do reload that I put in to fix the problem. Right? And essentially what I did was something like this. I put in that same put s at the beginning of the test before I did the update, and then I did it after the update before I actually did the assertion. When I then went over to the console and ran the test, I get my failure like we were getting at the end of class, but right here is the actual output from those two put s's. See why I put the asterisk in there to make them a little bit easier to spot? Okay. So it was coming back and telling me complete is false. Right? It was false before, it was false after. So sure enough, it wasn't that I had done anything wrong with the assert, I definitely did still have false for complete. So the other thing I then did was I went over to the actual update action itself, and inside the if statement, after I had actually said update the attributes before I redirect, I put my little put s in there as well. So essentially what would happen is I would end up seeing one of my little outputs from the test, then I would see the one from the controller, then I would see the last one from the test. And when I ran that, this is what I saw. In the test it was false, in the controller it was true, and then back in the test it was false again. So that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute, right? These are all the same to-do item. I can tell by the ID, right? The controller is correctly setting complete to true, but then when I get back over to the test, it's false again. I realize that even though we're fundamentally talking about the same to-do item from the database, we were kind of talking about different versions of it that were loaded into objects in memory at different times. And that's what kind of clued me in to the fact that I had a stale object. Right? So that's why I ended up putting in the to-do.reload. Right? Took all those put s's back out once I knew what the problem was and how to fix it. And now when I run the test, everything passes just fine. Okay? Probably not the most elegant solution in the world to fixing a problem like that. I wish I could do something super fancy like fire up some neat debugger and track the object in memory and its values and do something that would really blow everybody's mind. But the fact is, I still find a whole lot of debugging value in just putting in put s statements. Right? A lot of times it's the quickest, easiest way for me to be able to visualize what's going wrong and maybe get it fixed. Seem all right? Make sense?
I keep getting a syntax error with that comma on line 26 after the @to-do. It's an unexpected TI bar expecting keyword end.
Do you have the do up here?
Mm-hmm.
What else could that be? The @to-do, is it being loaded up in the setup method?
It's not registering that comma afterwards. After it.
Yeah, I was just thinking if that thing was nil or something, that might be throwing it off. What do you have up in the setup method? Fix yet?
Didn't fix it.
Huh, still nothing.
I've got that same thing, @to-do equals to-do's 1.
Okay.
close after. Oh, cool.
Okay. Okay. All right. So now with our test passing, the next thing I wanted to go on and talk about was rake tasks. Right? The way we had our to-do application set up was at the moment the user has the ability to create new to-do items. To-do items are listed. The user can then mark them as complete. The user can mark them as urgent. Whenever the user marks one as being complete, it just gets moved down to the completed to-do items. I have not actually provided the user with a way to actually delete to-do items. What I was thinking, kind of the way I like for to-do lists to work, is that I like for my completed to-dos to linger for a little bit. If you think about it, it would probably be easier in a lot of ways if whenever the user marked a to-do item as being complete, if we just deleted it, right? But I like to be able to see all the to-dos that I've completed within, let's say, a day. It gives me a great sense of accomplishment. So this is kind of the way I like for my own to-do list to work, is this sort of way. But it also then still leaves us with the problem of how do we ever get rid of to-dos permanently, right? When do to-dos ever actually get deleted? Well, do we give the user a delete option where they can come in and delete to-do items? It's a possibility, certainly. They could go back and clean off their completed to-dos whenever they would like. But something I thought would be a little bit more fun would be having the system automatically clean them off, let's say, every night at midnight. So everybody's completed to-dos basically build up over the course of a day, everybody who's using our wonderful little to-do list manager here. But then every night at midnight, all the completed to-dos disappear. Right? The big question with that kind of functionality would be, where do we put the code? Where do we put the functionality to have it automatically delete everything at midnight? The concept of having it delete something at a specific time doesn't really play along with anything that we've seen Rails do. Everything that we've been doing with Rails has basically been sort of user initiated. The user requests a page, right? That sort of thing. Maybe from that request to a controller action, other things happen, right? If we want something to automatically happen every night at midnight, does that mean we need to stay up till midnight every night and then go to a controller action by requesting a specific page that deletes all the completed to-dos? I don't know about you, but I'm way too old for staying up till midnight anymore. Once a year is about all I can manage. So what I really needed was I needed some other way of being able to have sort of a time-triggered application-specific behavior. And that is something that can be done with rake tasks, right? So rake is something that we've played with pretty much all semester, right? We've used rake from the very beginning to do things like migrate our database, right? We've seen it used to make other updates to the database, like rolling back. We've seen it used to run our tests, right? If we run rake -- tasks, we get a big long list of all of the different things that rake can do for us. There's quite a few of them, right? The thing that's neat about rake is that it's basically just a command line utility, which means we can go and at any time, right, whether we do it ourselves or whether we write a script of some sort to do it for us, we can trigger these different behaviors that then affect our application. Okay? Most all Unix systems, Unix-like systems, which would most likely be the kind of server that our Rails application would end up living on out in the real world, would be able to do things like automatically run rake tasks for us at specific times. So we could, for example, tell it to automatically run a rake task every night at midnight. Right? The only thing that we then lack is the ability to write a Rails task that could do something like go and clean off all the completed to-dos for us. Right? So that's basically what I wanted to show you how to do today. It's really not all that difficult. Right? Maybe we'll have a quick class. We'll see how it goes. Right? For starters, when you want to create a rake task, there's a specific place where they belong. In your project, you have a library folder, lib, right? And underneath the library folder, there is a subfolder there called tasks. That folder is specifically for creating rake tasks. Any rake task you want to create, you create it and you stick it there into that folder. Right? So in my tasks folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to call my new file sample.rake. Right? Whatever new files you create in there to hold your rake tasks, they always need to have a rake extension. So whatever you want to call it, .rake. Writing simple fundamental rake tasks in your file then is a very easy thing to do. You start off by putting in the keyword DESC, description. You then follow that with a string that describes what that rake task does. I'll say this is a test rake task. Maybe I'll say sample rake task. Then, after you've given it a description, every rake task goes inside a task block where you specify as a symbol what the name of that task is going to be. So I'll call this one sample 1, for example. So I have a description for a rake task, and then the actual task itself is basically the way this lays out. Inside the task block there then, you can basically put in whatever Ruby code you would like. Right? For this one, I'll just say put S, this is the output of sample 1. If I jump back over to my console now, and I run rake --tasks, which gives me a list of all of the tasks that Rake is capable of performing. If I look through there, my rake task now shows up. There it is highlighted. So I have a rake task there called sample 1. What I put in for the description shows up over there to the side. So it's sort of, I don't know, self-documenting is a strong way to put it, but built into the syntax of the rake task itself, you put in the information that someone would need to see in the list of tasks to understand what that thing is for. If I want to run it, I just type rake, the name of my task, and it executes. There it says this is the output of sample 1. Apparently I have some other thing in there that's also loading mini tests. But that's the basic idea. So rake tasks can be pretty easy to write. Let me create another one here. The description of this one, I'm going to say this is another sample rake task. I'll call this one sample 2. I'll just have it say this is the output of sample 2. Okay. In order to keep your rake tasks more usable, they're made to be very modular, where if you have a big job that you want to have a rake task do, instead of writing that as one huge rake task, you can write it as a bunch of smaller rake tasks. Rake itself then gives you a nice way to be able to bind those different tasks together, in that you can make one rake task dependent on others. So for example, here with my sample 2 rake task, if I follow the name of sample 2 with the name of another task like sample 1, what I'm doing is I'm telling Rake that the sample 2 task is dependent on the sample 1 task. What Rake will then do is if I ask it to execute sample 2, it will recognize that dependency, and it will first execute sample 1. If I jump back over to the console again, take a look at my tasks, I might pipe these to grep so that instead of seeing a list of all my Rake tasks, I just see these ones that have the word sample in them. Right? You can see I do have tasks there for sample 1, sample 2. If I tell it to run sample 2, sample 1 ran first, followed by sample 2. If I run sample 1, it just runs by itself because it has no dependencies. Nothing to it. Excuse me. Right. Let me create another task. There you go. With this third one, what I was going to do is just show you that you can make Rake tasks dependent on multiple other tasks. Right? If I come back up here to sample 2, and let's say that sample 2 not only is dependent on sample 1, but also on sample 3. Right? What I can do is instead of just giving it a single symbol, I can give it an array of symbols. So if I say that the sample 2 task is dependent on an array of sample 1 and sample 3, then Rake will automatically take those tasks in that order, 1 and then 3, and execute those before it executes sample 2. Back over to the console again. If I take a look, it's recognizing all 3 of my sample tasks. If I run sample 2, sample 1, then 3 execute, and then finally sample 2 execute since it was dependent on both of the others. Do you have any questions about this so far? Makes it nice and convenient, doesn't it? It's not at all uncommon when you start putting together Rake tasks that you start getting a lot of different tasks that all tend to have something to do with one another, that all sort of share a common theme or goal. Right? In order to organize your tasks a little bit better, your tasks can also be put into what's called a namespace. Right? So I could, for example, up at the top of my file here, put in namespace and then provide a name. I'll call it sample. I then provide a block to go along with that namespace and put all the tasks that belong to that particular group into it. I might come back up here then and rename the individual tasks themselves. Instead of calling them sample 1, I'll just call it 1. Sample 2, I'll just call 2. And I'll rename its dependencies over here to 1 and 3. 3 I'll rename to 3. Restructuring my names a little bit, taking into account my namespace. Back over on the console, if I take a look at my tasks now, you can see the formatting of them has changed a little bit. Instead of just being called sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, now they are sample colon 1, the word, sample colon 3, sample colon 2, right? So basically the namespace provides that extra piece of the name that goes in front of the colon. When you look at the other Rake tasks that are provided automatically in Rails, most of them are split up into namespaces, right? You can even have namespaces inside namespaces if you want. Right? But their namespaces are a great way to be able to sort of group together certain tasks that have to do with a particular subject. Maybe in our application, for example, if we built it out and not only had to-dos, but we also had users and other types of models, we might have some tasks that have to do with managing to-dos, other tasks that have to do with managing users. Well, we could take the tasks for users, take the tasks for to-dos, and we could split them up into separate namespaces. So if we happen to have, let's say, a clean task, the clean task maybe for to-dos goes back and gets rid of completed to-dos. The clean for users maybe goes back and wipes out or locks down user accounts that haven't been accessed. Right? Instead of having to call the Rake tasks things like clean underscore users, clean underscore to-dos, we could just put them into namespaces. So we would have things like to-do colon clean and users colon clean. It ends up being a much more structured, organized, easy to deal with, I think, way of being able to keep track of all your different Rake tasks. Okay. Structurally, fundamentally, that's basically it. Not all that complicated. Rake tasks aren't hard to put together fundamentally. Do you have any questions about them? Really just 3 keywords: namespace, description, and task. Other than that, it's all just blocks and plain old Ruby code. Okay, well, let's make some tasks for our to-do list then. I'm going to make a new file in my tasks folder. I'm going to call it to-do tasks. I'll just call it to-do.rake. To-dos, I think I'll say. To-dos.rake. In that file, I'm going to make a namespace, to-dos. I'm going to create a task in here. Let's call it mark overdue, mark urgent. Mark urgent is what I'm going to call it. What I want this task to do is any to-do item that is past its due date automatically gets marked as urgent. Okay? Right now, if I take a look over in my app, I have one to-do in here, test 2, that was due about 8 days ago. Right? I haven't manually marked it as being urgent, but the way I might, for example, use this Rake task is I might set up my server so that, say, once a minute, it automatically runs this mark urgent Rake task. So once a minute, any overdue task automatically gets marked as urgent. So how would I actually mark these as being urgent? Well, I could say from my to-dos, find all of them, and for each, take that particular to-do, and maybe we could say if that to-do's due date is less than datetime.now, I think it should be. Then I could say for that to-do, update attributes. And I want to update the urgent attribute to true. Except that's going to need to be a hash, isn't it? Something like that, probably. Might work. Who am I kidding? None of this is going to work. With something like that in there, if I jump back over to my console again, if I take a look at my Rake tasks for to-dos, is my Rake task not showing up at all? It's interesting. Oops. Not seeing it. Namespace to-dos. Task, mark urgent. Alright, now this wasn't the problem I was expecting. Is it in there and I'm overlooking it?
You add the description in. It'll show up.
Oh, I forgot the description. That's what I forgot. Thank you. There it is. Alright, so in the namespace of to-dos, mark urgent. Alright, if I go and I run that thing, to-dos, colon, mark urgent. Ooh, bunch of errors. Main problem, uninitialized constant to-do. So here, when I say my to-dos, it doesn't know what a to-do is. Well, how can that be? Over in the to-dos controller, we do that all over the place. To-do, to-do, to-do. Not working here in my Rake task, though. Right? The reason it's not working is that unless we specifically say so, the Rake task is very independent of the Rails app itself. It's basically just a little command line tool, right, that has no knowledge of the actual Rails application that it's a part of. Anytime we want to be able to access our models or anything else having to do with the actual Rails application, what we need to do is we need to take that Rake task and we need to make it dependent on our application's environment. To do that, just like before we were saying that sample2 task was dependent on sample1, what I can do here is I can say that the mark urgent task is dependent on the environment. Right? That will be understood, environment, as meaning the Rails environment. The Rails environment will be loaded. All the paths set, classes loaded, those sorts of things. So at that point, my Rake task should then be able to access my to-do model. If I jump back over to the console again and again try to rerun that to-dos mark urgent, this time there's no problems at all. It went right through. And if I go back to the browser and hit refresh, sure enough, all of the tasks that were overdue got marked as being urgent. They're showing up now in red. Test 2 and, oh yeah, Teach Rails class, that was overdue, wasn't it? Got another one that'll be overdue here in about 10 minutes. Talk about Rake tasks. I timed that pretty well. Okay. So, does that make sense? Kind of a built-in Rake task called environment at a higher level, but we have access to it. So when we write a Rake task, we can make ours dependent on that environment task to make sure that the Rails environment is loaded and set up so that we can then do, essentially, from inside that Rake task, the same sort of things that we would typically do from inside a controller action. The difference, of course, being, though, that a controller action only executes when somebody requests it. With a Rake task, on the other hand, we can execute it from the command line anytime we choose, or we can even set up a script or a scheduler of some sort to execute it based on time. Not too bad. Okay. How about another Rake task then to get rid of overdue, or to get rid of the completed to-dos? I'll put in another one and I won't forget the description this time. Let's call this one remove completed. let's see, for this one I could say to do dot where, and I want to find it where completed, or just complete I think it's called, isn't it? Is true. And then for each one of those, I'll pass it to a block and I'll call t.destroy on it. Jump back over to the console. Yeah, my remove completed task is showing up. If I run it, oh yeah, I always forget something, don't I? Make it dependent on the environment. Give it another try. Still errors. I misspelled destroy. Should have known.
You need to develop a gem that underlines misspelled words.
Yeah. Or I just need to teach my computer that whenever I type to story, it needs to fix that. I only do that 4 times a day. There we go. No errors shown that time. If I jump back over to my browser and refresh, sure enough, it looks like all of the completed to-dos were wiped out. So I could set it up so that that task could run once a day, run it at midnight, run it at 6 a.m., whatever we want. And magically, the completed to-dos would all just disappear. That's it. Rake tasks are a handy little tool. I use them for lots of different things and different sites. My site I use for class, probably my favorite Rake task. What is it called? Can't even think what I called it. But it runs late at night. It runs at midnight or 2 in the morning or something like that. But what it does is it scours through my database and it finds things like labs that haven't been graded, for example. And it puts all that together into an email and emails it to me. So every morning when I wake up, my site has kind of a to-do list there for me in a way. You know, these are all the things that you need to grade today. These are all the things that have been turned in that need to be graded. So it does a bunch of other little things, updating student information, updating class rosters from some of TCC systems. So lots of good stuff to be done with Rake. Anything else you want to try? Any questions you have? Well, if you're running it on a Unix or Linux type system, which is going to be the most common platform you would probably deploy your Rails website on, Unix and Linux systems pretty much all have built in a system utility called cron, which is just a time-based scheduler. If you're out on the command line, if you type cron tab -e, it'll let you edit your cron file. Oh, I apparently don't have one on this machine.
I just saw an article on that somewhere on cron.
Pretty common, yeah. What you would basically do then is just kind of put in a pattern of stuff here inside this file. Cron sample. Awesome cron jobs example. That sounds like a good one. Here are basically the time part of the fields that you put in, but this is kind of what I was looking for. This little thing right here is essentially what a cron job typically looks like, something you would put into that file. Right? Essentially what it does is it lets you specify a very specific time or day or month, something having to do with time, and then you tell it exactly what to do anytime that time occurs. So in this case, we're talking about like it says here below, the 30th minute of the 8th hour, so 8:30 a.m. on the 10th day of June, the 6th month. And the asterisk there means we're not being specific about that aspect of it. That's the day of the week. So we're saying every day of the week or any day of the week. Then it's saying run this particular script.
If it was a certain day, we could just type in Monday or Tuesday?
You'd put in the numeric equivalent of it. And I think cron uses 0 for Sunday and then on up from there. Yeah. So there's lots of interesting things you can do. Here's one that runs 11 and 4. At 11 and 4 o'clock every day. Here's one that runs, let's see, 9 a.m. through 6 p.m. every day. Lots and lots of them. The web is pretty rife with examples of cron. Since cron's format is a little bit of a pain, trying to remember the fields in the order they go in, if you Google for cron examples or cron help, there's a million different places that will give it to you because everybody always forgets the order that everything goes in. So what we could essentially then do on our production server is set up a cron job and tell it to run our rake task, put in the rake command essentially, so that we have it run every minute, once a day, the different things we were talking about. That's the basic idea of it. Anything else? All right. Kind of thought that would take longer than it did. Do you want to make a clean break right here and start a new subject on Thursday? Or do you want to do some talking now and probably a little bit more about it on Thursday? We're getting towards the end. I'm getting down to the bottom of the bucket of things to talk about.
What's the next thing to talk about?
Deployment. We'll have plenty of time at Thursday to talk about it. Here's what my plan was break tasks today. We've done that. Thursday, let's talk about deploying Rails apps. That may go smoothly. It probably won't because of TCC's network. They're going to block us from being able to get to anything interesting. So we're probably going to do a whole lot of talking and a whole lot of typing commands that don't work. Right? Next week, then, we're scheduled to have class on Thursday. But whether we have class or not is up to you. What I was going to do to try to entice you into having class was that if we do have class Thursday next week, Thursday finals week, is we'll talk about Ajax, doing partial page updates, that sort of thing. We can use our to-do example. So that's the idea. That's the roadmap here for our last couple of classes. All right, let's go ahead and stop there for today. We'll talk about deployment Thursday. Thursday after that, Ajax if you guys want to be here.